Where's the camera?
Go ahead, call the meeting in order.
Yes.
Can we let Jeff sit down?
So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 2022 ITS meeting.
Yeah.
All right, Margaret Kibblin, City of Tampa, calling the meeting to order.
You need to be a little more louder.
I need to speak louder.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I would like if the members would introduce themselves and, call their name for any questions.
I call him, or are you calling him?
You.
Okay. Do I have the list?
Oh, no, not for the attendance. Once we call the order, I don't think we have any public comments. So we'll just go and review and approve the minutes from October 2021.
Okay, so as we move into the review of the October 14th, 2021 meeting minutes, has everyone on the committee had an opportunity to review what was submitted? Any comments? Any corrections? Without any hands raised or requests for any changes, would someone please make a motion to approve the minutes for October 14th, 2021?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Is that Brian? Did you? A second?
I'll second. It's Anna.
Anna seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? None being heard. Motion approved.
Can I also get the names of the first and the second?
Yes, Anna seconded.
Okay,
Brian made the motion.
all right. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item.
Do we need to call roll, or do you have that?
I'm not sure if I'm calling the roll or Gail is. Gail?
Yep, I can call the roll for you.
Thank you.
And please bear with me on some of the names if I ask you to pronounce it. Margaret, would you please pronounce your last name?
Yes, it's Kubalins
Thank you, Margaret Kubulins.
here.
Brian Gentry,
Here.
Brian McCarthy.
Here.
Let's see here. The next one is online. Fred Baxter. Frank Koffenauer. Pauline Nunez.
Here.
Anna Quinones.
Here.
Dexter Corbin.
Present.
Jeff Sims.
Here.
Is it Achilles Cortellis?
Yes, here.
Thank you. And then I have Megan from FDOT as a non-voting member. Megan, would you please pronounce your last name? And let me see if she's online.
It's showing us she's online.
She is, so I'm going to mark her as here. And that completes our roll call. Oh, I do need to let you know that some members are participating virtually because of medical reasons and the local declaration of emergency.
And Gail, we just approved the October 2021 minutes.
Yes, and there, which Brian made the motion?
Brian Gentry.
Thank you.
All right, should we, can you move on to the next one?
Okay, sure. Let's move on to the action items. So we have the Smart Cities Mobility Plan recommendations from a presentation by Dr. Johnny Wong.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Whoever's running the show, would you mind giving me control so I can run my slides? All right, I got it. Thank you.
Once again, I'm trying to.
How's that looking?
Looks great, Johnny.
Okay. Good afternoon, ITS committee. This is Johnny Wong, TPO staff, and Today I'm here to bring you the final status update of the Smart Cities Mobility Plan.
Donnie, once
Yeah,
I've not made you the presenter. Oh, you are the presenter. Okay.
yeah, I am. So thank you all. We have brought you updates periodically over the past year. This plan has actually been delayed several times, once due to COVID and once due to stoppage of work. But we're happy to finally be at a point where we're moving forward, and we feel that we will be wrapping this up within the next couple months. At this meeting today, we're not presenting the final draft of the plan. We're still waiting on a couple documents from some key stakeholders. We want to hold out to include those in the final plan. So rather than bringing you an incomplete draft today, we're just presenting you with a list of the recommendations. These recommendations will be included in the final draft, so you're not seeing anything that is liable to change between now and then. At the end of today's presentation, we're only going to be asking you to support the recommendations, and much of this will look very familiar because we have actually relied upon you to help us develop these. Many of you have seen this several times before, but there are some names in the chat box that I don't recognize, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it. The Smart Cities Plan, again, we've been working on this for roughly 18 months by now. The purpose of this update is to update the previous iteration, which was last updated in 2013. The second reason why we're choosing to update it now is we think it's really important to begin making transportation technologies less intimidating, both to members of the public, but especially to planners. What we found in some early assessments were that most planners are not choosing to include smart cities technologies when they're doing either a sub-area or a corridor study, because much of the technology is a mystery to them. So one of our goals for this plan is to help them understand how these technologies can help them achieve the goals that they desire. Next, we wanted to develop a prioritization criteria to help technology projects compete for funds. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail as we move forward, but what we think we have come up with will help us achieve the goals that we've established in the long-range plan with a new prioritization system. And then lastly, we developed this to help guide tech deployments and support the work of the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance. And speaking of which, the Alliance was created 4 years ago, and many of us are participants, or we attend regularly at least. The Alliance's goal was to deploy smart cities projects to help solve regional problems. And the structure of it is that the Alliance is divided into 3 action tracks. The first one is reimagining infrastructure. The second is mobility as a service. And the third is data and analytics. And I happen to be the project manager for the data and analytics track. Most of the members of the Alliance represent implementing agencies in Hillsborough County, but it kind of spans the region. Most of those members are working for implementing agencies that have the power to construct these projects, to deploy these projects. The TPO's role is a little bit different, and that speaks to why I manage the data analytics track. Because what the TPO can bring to the Alliance is to think of better ways to evaluate projects and then use that data to prioritize them so that they can compete for the funding that's available. And again, with this prioritization matrix that we're hoping to show you today, we think that we've made some strides forward in that respect. The Smart Cities Plan that we're on the verge of wrapping up is actually phase 1 of what we foresee as being a 2-step overarching plan. In this phase that we're working on, we've produced several deliverables. The first is an inventory of smart cities technologies. We came up with that by doing a comprehensive assessment of smart cities plans and documents from around the country, and in some cases, cities around the globe. With that inventory, we categorized each technology according to whether Hillsborough County has it or if they don't have it, and what the benefits of each technology is. After we created that inventory, we met with all of our partner agencies to determine which of those technologies you all have already deployed or which ones you're considering for deployment in the short term. And then the main deliverable of this phase is the prioritization matrix, and we have also asked you to review that in the previous months. So going through each of those deliverables really quickly, the first element we produced is the tech inventory. And like I mentioned, we identified well over 100 technologies by looking at plans and documents literally across the globe. Moving from leftmost column to the right, these are categorized into strategic areas first. The strategic areas are kind of like problems to resolve in the community, and there's some overlap between them, so it's not a cut and dry kind of thing. If you look down, just as an example, the number 4 strategic area that I have on this screen is communications and connectivity. The tech that fall into this area include things like 5G technology, IoT networks, expansion of the fiber network, public broadband, and some others. We then broke down each of those technologies according to whether it exists and is deployed in Hillsborough, whether it exists but is not deployed in Hillsborough, or whether it's emergent and we need to explore more or just keep our eye on it. The second part of the inventory process is that we have been working to collect shapefiles from all the agencies. We want to collect a shapefile that shows deployments of ITS and other smart cities technologies across the county and then eventually across the region. Most of you have responded. We're still waiting to receive a couple files, but once we get them, we're going to stitch them all together, host it on our GIS, and allow you all to access it so you can see not only the locations of your own deployments, but what's going on with the other jurisdictions. The next element is a state of the practice evaluation. So you may have noticed that in the Smart Cities tech inventory, there were a lot of things that didn't specifically pertain to transportation. But for the tech that is inherently for mobility, we dug into a little bit more detail about those and then considered what the implications were for transportation performance. We put the transportation tech that we thought was most relevant into a fact sheet booklet that includes a picture of it, a case study of where it's been successfully deployed, what the tech is, what it does, information on how much it costs. We color coded it. So if you look at the bottom, there's a list of our 5 investment programs, and the ones that are color coded show which programs would be impacted if we were to deploy this kind of technology. So this booklet should become a very helpful resource that you can use for planners at your own agency or for distributing to the general public if they have questions about what the tech is. The full booklet of fact sheets, I think we produced maybe 32 fact sheets, and they're included as an appendix to the plan. And then the last deliverable that I want to cover today is the prioritization matrix. This is, again, really important because it's going to allow us to rank projects amongst other priorities submitted to us that can compete for funding. This matrix was really, it's like the tip of the, or it's the feather in the cap for this plan, so to speak, because this is helping us solve a problem that we encountered in the Transportation Improvement Program prioritization this past year, as well as in years past. The main problem is that the TPO maintains an investment program or category called Smart Cities, but we don't typically receive prioritization requests for projects that you might consider a Smart Cities project. Most of the projects that get submitted to us here to compete for funding are pretty traditional. Most of them are just intersection improvement projects, and there's nothing inherently technological or innovative about them in most instances. So because most of the submissions we receive for that program are traditional, the way that we score the projects has to be amended to make it to allow for smart cities tech projects to compete for funds. Because currently, if any jurisdiction submits a funding request for anything that's new or innovative, it's probably going to score pretty low. And in fact, we had an instance this past year where a tech project scored at the very bottom of that program. And it was due to one of our board members speaking up that asked us to prioritize it higher. So for submissions that we have received in the past, like bus tracking system, we received a CAD AVL funding request. Parking management system, I believe City of Tampa either submitted that or has been considering submitting that for a while. EV charging stations, mobile payment systems, none of these would have ranked very highly. However, with the changes we've made to the prioritization, we think that these have a really good shot at getting a portion of the funds that the TPO controls moving forward. The old metrics that we use to score smart cities traditional projects were AM and PM peak period travel time index score, so peak period TTI. We also measured delay in minutes, and for transit projects, on-time performance. But again, they're not amenable to most of the projects. So some of the metrics that we chose to include this time with the new prioritization scheme are whether or not it aligns with goals that we laid out in the LRTP. And one of those objectives, or one of those goals, is to be more innovative. So this is kind of like allowing us to achieve the goal that we established for ourselves. We are also looking at cost, implementation timeframe, whether or not the project facilitates equity or has benefits for an underserved community, dependencies, risks, limitations, the severity of any risk. We're looking at benefit cost ratio and the strategic value that a deployment would bring to the community. I've included a couple slides to show you how this will work, because we're going to be using this matrix for the TIP prioritization update that's coming up to be adopted this June. So the first two inclusion criteria that are shown on the screen are what I'm considering the barriers to entry. To even be evaluated using this new prioritization matrix, we're going to ask ourselves, was this project that's requesting funding identified as a high priority by our agency partners? If any of you all told me that the project is a priority for you, then it clears that bar and it gets a point. The second thing we're looking at is, does the project align with our LRTP goals of maintaining infrastructure, reducing crashes, improving reliability and reducing congestion, providing more modal choices, and facilitating economic growth. So if the project hits the mark for any of these 5 criteria shown on the screen, it'll get a point. And if it happens to achieve more than one goal, it can earn more than 1 point. And then lastly, there are some supplemental criteria. We're going to be looking at the estimated cost of the project. The criteria are biased to show a preference toward low-cost projects. We want to reward pilot projects, and that was the subject, that was a topic of discussion with the agency partners when we met, but we ultimately decided to maintain a preference for cost-effective projects. Second, the implementation timeframe, and with the criteria, there's a preference toward quick deployments. A short term would be between 0 and 3 years to get it off the ground. You can earn a point if the project can demonstrate that it enhances equity in an underserved community. There are no points associated with this, but it's a consideration to look at any dependencies or risks or limitations. If one or more projects score the same quantitatively, we will look at which one has fewer dependencies, risks, or limitations, and that can serve as kind of like a tiebreaker in case there is one. We're also going to be looking at risk severity, and less risky projects will be preferred. Benefit cost ratio and strategic value can also earn a point. We're going to integrate this in the TIP. I'll speak on this a little bit more in a second, but the only feasible way we saw to allow this to, or to deploy this prioritization matrix to allow smart cities tech projects to compete is to encourage you all to submit proposals for new tech projects. And we are not able to set aside any specific amount of funding. However, of the projects that are submitted to us annually, the 3 that score the highest will automatically earn a spot among the other smart cities traditional projects. So it'll allow projects like intersection improvements to compete with things like the vehicle tracking or transit prioritization or transit signal prioritization, as an example. This is a slide showing you what the 5 criteria are for our smart cities submissions this TIP cycle. So we're still maintaining the traditional metrics that we use, like peak period travel time index and average travel delay. We're now including the consideration for equity. And then for tech projects, we're going to be looking at numbers 4 and 5. Is the project listed in the Smart Cities Vision Map? Meaning, like, is it something you all told us is a priority? And if it is, which 3 score the highest? The 3 that score the highest will be able to compete for a portion of the $15 to $20 million in grants that are controlled by the TPO. So we're thinking that this will really accelerate deployment of tech projects moving forward. Just to ensure that the criteria were consistent with the goals we have, we looked at some of the projects that have been submitted to us as priorities in the past, and they all scored pretty high using the criteria that we've adopted. So we feel pretty confident that this will work out pretty well. It's not prioritizing projects that would never have had a shot at getting deployed. It's accurately representing the benefits of some of the projects that have been submitted to us in the past. We actually pitched the idea to our policy committee about setting aside funds specifically for tech projects, and unfortunately that wasn't well received by our policy committee. As you can see from this pie chart, most of the funds that are controlled by the TPO are allocated to the State of Good Repair Infrastructure Maintenance Program. About 81% of the money that's programmed over the next 5 years falls into this category. 8% is safety projects, 9% intersection and congestion projects, and then 2% for mobility. We proposed to the policy committee to split this up evenly, 25% for State of Good Repair, 25% into the other categories. They didn't go for that. They said that they have a stronger preference to maintain the infrastructure and drive down crashes. So as a result of that guidance, we weren't able to convince them. We weren't able to successfully convince them to carve out a certain amount of money for tech projects. But by selecting the top 3 scoring, they're still able to compete for funds. So we weren't able to deliver to the highest order, but we still think that this will accelerate. In having meetings with our agency partners and as a result of presenting this concept to the policy committee, some of the feedback we received was that the implementation timeframe in the prioritization criteria should not be biased toward short-term projects. I believe the City of Tampa told us that we should consider preferring projects where funds might go to sustain it. So rather than just getting pilot projects off the ground, they would want to compete for funds to allow a project to sustain out into the future. Ultimately, we decided against it, but we're still leaving the door open for that kind of change in the future. Again, this is the first time that we're going to be implementing this matrix, so we're going to have to see how it works out. But the door is always open in the future for making that adjustment if we see that it needs to be changed. The second item of feedback we received was to increase funding for the smart cities tech projects. Just about all of you gave us that feedback, and we tried our best, but we don't think that the board is supportive of that right now. Some of the members of our policy committee stressed the importance of digital inclusion, specifically public broadband access. So we made sure to include that concept in the state of good repair category. This next bullet point is just kind of an update. As I mentioned, the board may not be receptive of allocating more funds. And then lastly, it was proposed that we circulate the booklet of fact sheets to all of our agency partners and some of the NGOs in the area to help raise the profile or communicate the value of smart cities tech projects so that they have a better shot of competing for federal funding. At the time that we were kind of like moving into the second half of this, wrapping up this project, the county was considering its ATC MTD submission, and one big part of that was to communicate the benefits. So by enlightening the public about what some of these tech can do to improve transportation in the county, we think that we're going to give those grant applications a better shot at getting approval. So the recommendations that will be included as part of the final draft and what we're presenting to you today are to just generally plan for deployments of the highest ranking projects that were identified. What that means is we're going to prioritize projects based on the feedback you all gave us. You all came up with a list of the tech projects you think are most important, and we're going to try our best to prioritize those. To quantify the benefits, to quantify the performance of some of these deployments, we're going to use the prioritization matrix that we came up with to evaluate smart city solutions and allow those to compete for the funds that the TPO controls by giving the three highest ranking projects an automatic top spot in that investment program. And then lastly, we're going to circulate those fact sheets to raise awareness. The proposed action to the committee today is to approve the recommendations I have shown on the screen and explained to you all, and to forward to the TPO for consideration. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Okay. Open the floor for discussion. Can you go back to the, should call it a caterpillar. Go back maybe 2 slides? Yeah. No, go forward again.
This one.
The recommendations, so plan for deployment of highest ranking projects. Okay, and the gap analysis. Does anyone have any questions or comments about these recommendations? Okay, in the room, I'm not hearing any conversation. How about online? Virtually, does someone have any comment?
That's not really surprising. We have had this conversation with you all so much. I'm sure you're tired of hearing it at this point. I should also add that we have received letters of support from most of the agencies following our one-on-ones. So we circulated the draft plan to you all, I think back in October. And most of you had some time to review it, and many of you sent us back letters of support. Some of you even offered feedback, and we have made those changes where appropriate.
I did have one question. I apologize if this was already discussed. In terms of the allocation of funds, was there anything in terms of overlapping projects where maybe there is a section that they are going to fix or maintain, but a smart city project would upgrade it. So it's not so much that, the fund is moving from one section to another. It's, why maintain it if we could just upgrade it, sort of mentality.
No one actually offered that critique. So I'll note that and then include that in the final draft of the plan. Just to kind of convey what the conversation was during our policy committee meeting, again, we asked them if it was a good idea for us to evenly divide the funding. We noted that smart cities has been underfunded traditionally, and the conversation that the policy committee members said was that they still have a very strong preference toward Vision Zero because the implications of investing in that program are saving lives. We don't dispute that. I think, sorry, before I get to that. So we don't dispute that. The second was that it's really important to maintain the infrastructure because we have already invested money and that represents a sunk cost that should not be allowed to deteriorate. I think moving forward, we're going to continue to advocate to the board that, or educate the board as much as we can, that many of these smart cities tech projects will have benefits that cut across investment programs. So traditionally, a lot of these smart cities projects have been thought of as congestion projects, but that's not always the case. In most cases, in fact, they will have benefits in more than one program, and that could be Vision Zero, that could be State of Good Repair, Real Choices, any combination thereof. So we're a little bit lacking in how we evaluate the benefits, but again, this is just phase one. I'm hoping to dig more into that moving forward, and then if we feel we have a compelling argument, we're going to continue to petition the board to allow us to evaluate these projects in the best way possible.
Can the speaker please identify themselves?
Who was speaking?
Oh, that's Pauline from the city of Plant City.
Okay, thanks, Pauline.
Okay. And thank you, Johnny, for answering that.
No problem. I'm sure I gave you way more info than you asked for.
Anyone else? Okay, could you move forward to the action?
Sure.
So I'd like to make a motion to take the action to approve the recommendations of the Smart Cities Mobility Plan and forward to the TPO board for consideration.
I'll make the motion. This is Brian Gentry.
Brian Gentry makes the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Susanna.
Anna seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None being heard, the motion passed.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay, action item B, attendance review and declaration of vacant seats. Vishaka.
Yep. Just need to pull the agenda. So this action item, as per this action item, every year, at least one time, the TPO board will review the ITS committee membership and all the memberships, and review the vacancies, if any. And according to the TPO bylaws, we will make a consideration that any member who is unable to serve or attend 3 consecutive meetings, which means 3 out of 4 for this committee, we will have to reconsider their position and make sure that they are willing to move forward, or if they have any problems, we have to find an alternate for that. So that being said, today I will just review the attendance sheet for today. This is what the board has approved as of, this is what the 2021 attendance was. I think Margaret just took over in July, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the list for your review. since Justin left with Hart, we have Dexter, who just got appointed yesterday, I mean, at the TPO board yesterday. So Justin will be representing Hart, and we will try to find an alternate also for that. But other than that, I think Dan is also not in the position, and I believe we will have to find an alternate for that. Until then, Megan stays serving as his alternate. But other than that, everything else is as it is. And we did notice that there were a couple of members who could not attend some meetings. So just wanted to review this, and we will be most likely moving to election only the next meeting. Is there any questions on the attendance review? Are there any questions?
I don't have any. Does anyone else? How about virtually? Anyone online have questions?
Okay. So the action today is none, because this is just for informational purposes. And going forward, we will come back with the election review for the next cycle. And then we will see if we need any additional positions. And with that, I will move on. I think those were the only two action items for today. We will move on to the status reports, and the next one for consideration is the storm evacuation and shelter in place study, which is managed by Allison Gay, TPO staff. Allison, are you there?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, okay. So I'm Allison Ye, with the TPO staff, and I also have with me here today Karen Kozaleski with Cambridge Systematics, who's the consultant lead on this project. So we're going to tag team this. Just a little bit of background from me. We started this effort around June last year with the hurricane season, and the goal at that time was to support emergency evacuation planning in Hillsborough County. We know there's a lot of plans in place already. Sorry, I don't think somebody has something on, they're shuffling or something. There you go. Okay. So we're trying to support emergency evacuation in the county by helping to increase the resiliency of our system. So what that means for us is to use best practices we found and to use a modeling process from the Florida Department of Emergency Management called time evacuation time model to look at potential enhancements to strategies for evacuation. And there are already a lot of strategies for evacuation, but they usually involve increasing capacity and widening the roads. So we've been trying to look at alternative strategies to that. We're not working alone on this. Through the process, we've been working with the county's emergency management and Tampa's emergency management, working with the local mitigation strategy group, engaging Hart and Sunshine Line, the school district, and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Right now, what we have for you today is some preliminary data, and what we're hoping that you could help us with is we're really interested in your thoughts on the operational strategies that we're proposing. We're still going through some of the modeling processes, but wanted to bring it to this group first to get some kind of technical feedback of what we have thus far. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen at this point and we'll come back with questions in a minute. Karen, you're on mute, Karen. Still on mute. Kachaka, there's a lot of static in the background. I don't know what that might
This
be.
is Jason. It seems like the static is actually on Karen's end.
Oh, really? Start trying to speak to us. Okay. Karen, we're not hearing you at all. Okay. While we're waiting for Karen, I'll just mention that for every TPO project, we have a project website, of course. And for this particular project, if you go on that project website, you just hit TPO, it's kind of in the recent projects list. And there's an interactive map for you to look at shelters and transit routes currently, evacuation zones, just to get a sense of what the routes and shelter locations are right now, along with what the evacuation zones are. And, you know, oh, I think I hear Karen now. Sorry.
I appreciate your patience.
Yes.
And great, yeah. So as Allison said, but today we're going to give you a little bit of a status update. We want to talk to you a little bit about how we got to the issues that we're analyzing, and obviously get your ideas and suggestions. I'm very excited to be with this group. You all are often in the kind of in the front line when it comes to evacuation. So we want to make sure that what we're looking at and proposing makes sense and would be a benefit in your estimation. So we are at this point in time kind of going through our evaluation. As Allison mentioned, we're doing some sensitivity modeling to see how much of a benefit we get from some of these different strategies. And this has been pushed, the schedule has been pushed out, but we will be working to get a final report out and back to the TPO board by April, I believe we said. So just generally the process, we've been using public input to identify issues of concern to people during evacuations, having to do with sheltering or transportation. I'll go a little bit about through the information we learned from that process. Then we'll also tell you what some of the recommendations we have, and then how that will lead into the report. So as Allison suggested, we're going to show you some hotspot locations in terms of where we think during an evacuation there will be some congested bottlenecks. We want to see if you have any other strategies to consider our recommendations along the way. So as I mentioned, we had an open house, and then we also had an online survey. Neither one received a lot of input, but it was beneficial to kind of get a feel from people in terms of how they feel about evacuation. So what we learned, we asked about when do they evacuate, where do they evacuate, and if they were asked to evacuate some of the items of importance to them. So generally, we heard a lot about, was there a comment? Okay. Generally, we heard a lot about, the uncertainty around a storm, which is, for the most part, is difficult for us to address, where it's going to land and how intense it's going to be. But the other things people mentioned, if and where they were going to locate to, is, having a place to go, being able to stay with family and friends and their pets was also important, and then having some privacy and security, kind of hinting at people reluctant to go to shelters, perhaps. The online survey, similar questions. You'll see that security and having a place to go was important. We were able to ask a few more questions, so that's why the pets come up. Cost generally was not a factor until we came to a time to where they were going to evacuate to, where the idea of having to stay in a hotel for an extended period of time might come up. Access to transportation was an issue that was often raised, and then some people felt their job would keep them from being able to evacuate or limit where they could evacuate to should they need to. To help supplement this effort, we looked at a couple of statewide surveys. FIU does one every year. Florida National University does one every year to look at the culture of preparedness. I don't know if you've seen this kind of information before, but they look, typically after a large hurricane year, the next year people are not, they prepare for a heavy year, but the next year they kind of drop down. So information access is one area though where about 90% of the people continue to say they have access to information in the last 15 years or so. That's been pretty much unchanged. Having a plan of action has actually somewhat dropped a little bit from on the order of 85% to 75%, with some hovering back and forth depending on hurricane years. The perception of vulnerability also kind of goes up and down. People tend to have a relatively low perception of being vulnerable, so that we all feel we can withstand anything, are willing to stick it out. And then that also feeds into, even if people are ordered to evacuate, many won't. And so that's about 30, it was between 40% and it's been closer to 30% the last 2 or 3 years. So we found that kind of interesting in terms of people that aren't evacuating that should be, and perhaps some that are, shouldn't be but are. The University of South Florida also did a survey. They asked the questions a little bit differently, and then they also looked at the effects of COVID. If you all have been interested in what that might have been, they asked not only about evacuation zones. They asked a question about severe hurricane with strong winds. So just as a quick reminder, evacuation zones are tied to storm surge. So they relate to an impact by water. So people that may have homes that they feel cannot, sustain strong winds may want to evacuate independent of their location near to a storm surge. So, and that's what this survey is showing, that with strong hurricanes and with strong winds and a hurricane, people would be likely to leave, stay with family and friends. Some would stay home, and some would go to a hotel. The effects of COVID are on the order of about a 20% drop in people that would use shelters. So before COVID, about 55% of people said that they would definitely or probably go to a shelter if need be, and that dropped to under, closer to 30%, feeling that felt the risk in a shelter with COVID was too great, at the order of 60%. This was done in the 2020 timeframe, just to give you a perspective of that information. And then they said that if there was to evacuate, if they asked them whether they would evacuate if the next hurricane was expected to have a major impact, and 80% of the population said they would. And these are figures for Hillsborough County, I should mention. Even though they did the survey statewide, they were able to distinguish it for the county alone. So 80% of the people in Hillsborough said they are likely to evacuate, meaning quite a few people on the road, plus there's probably something similar in your neighboring counties that would be then influencing Hillsborough as well. So some of the key themes, we're kind of seeing that word cloud to the left were items we asked in the survey that we didn't mention or they felt should be emphasized some more. So you'll see the congestion, access to fuel and gas, traffic and things like that, and uncertainty. So obviously the storm uncertainty was a big factor. Traffic congestion is main concern, and we'll talk quite a bit about this in a few minutes, including pets with family and friends. And that includes, in addition to pets, there was also some concern about people that have sick or ailing or older relatives that may not be as mobile and need some assistance in evacuating or staying. And then cost, not seen as much of a problem. So the study issues, we kind of grouped them into these 5 areas: congestion, evacuation operations, those and transit operations. Those in particular are the ones we hope you'll comment on today. We also want to talk about event-related communications and behaviors that are affecting evacuation and sheltering. The one study I did not mention yet is that every so often the state and regional planning councils do the statewide regional hurricane evacuation study. And so that information looks at behavioral data, household survey, and in this case, this year, cell phone data to determine where people evacuate to. And so that also is coming into play into some of these behaviors that we've seen. So this is I will go through these spots a little bit closer. These are we identified kind of 10 locations for the arterials and 10 for the freeways, for the interstates, in terms of the ones that potentially will see congestion during a hurricane. We looked at speed data during Irma to evaluate the areas that did see congestion during Irma as compared to regular time periods, and then also looked at 2045 and rated them. So just to let you know, give you a list of them if that's easier for you. Obviously, I-75 or segments of I-75 and I-4 are on the list. But then there's also some arterial, Bruce B. Downs in a few places, at Dale Mabry in a few places, US 301, and even to the airport and then Mango Road. So just real quickly, these maps again a little bit slower. These are this is with the evacuation zones on them, A through E, which correspond to hurricane categories 1 through 5. So you can see that in the blue would be a hurricane category 5 of the areas that would be requested to evacuate or mandated to evacuate. And then the brown, the darkest brown or tan is in a category 1. The lines on there are directional, if you can kind of see that. So not surprising, it is northbound and eastbound for the most part, although there are a few southbound and westbound segments as well. Then we also are very concerned with, in this study, with people that don't have access to transportation or have limited resources. And so we've also looked at this data as compared to the TPO's environmental justice layers, which include low-income households and then households that consist of people that are non-white and Hispanic or Latino. I always have to watch how I say that because we have to do some things in negative to be able to do that. So some of the areas do touch against some of these corridors, and those in particular we'll be kind of looking at the solutions. With those hotspot locations, we are looking at different solutions in terms of how to address potential congestion and improve clearance times during an evacuation. Most of these you'll be familiar with: reversible lanes, keeping Spelman eastbound during the of emergency, which has probably already been done. Emergency shoulder use. This is on the interstate. For the current DOT policy is not to use contraflow. If you hear that phrase, the issue with contraflow is that each entrance has to be and exit then has to be monitored by staffed by emergency personnel. So you're taking a lot of police and firefighters, sheriffs to be able to do that. So the thinking is by opening up shoulders, we can get more capacity on those freeways. And it had proved useful in past hurricanes, and so there's much broader use of that going forward. The other reason against contraflow is FEMA and power suppliers and Home Depot and folks like that do want to be able to stage supplies for recovery afterwards. So they need to be coming the reverse way. One of the next strategies, the next two strategies in particular, is one that was hoping this group might be able to talk to as to whether they are already done during a hurricane or how much more could potentially be done with them. One is obviously traffic signal coordination so that event planning type of coordination that I'm sure you do with events at the arena, stadium, stuff like that. And then also additional signage in terms of being able to provide information about where there are travel delays, where there may be blockages, and or detour setup. And I'll just finish and then I'll kind of open it up to discussion. We're also talking about some strategic capacity improvements, and what I mean by strategic is small. We're not trying to do significant widening, but there may be some intersections or some interstate ramps that could be reconfigured to support some additional movement, through movement or turning movement. And then another operational suggestion is phased evacuation, trying to suggest some people leave earlier than others. Typically, that's visitors. You have heard this probably used in the Keys. They request visitors to leave earlier than they request residents to leave in order to kind of phase out that evacuation response. So I am going to touch on transit and a couple others, but before we do that, I thought I would stop, see if there are any questions, and then specifically ask what people think about some of these strategies to address evacuations.
We have a quiet group today.
I have a question probably. It's not strategy, but how do we pass this information around? That most of the times I feel like personally, also like, how do you get the right information as to when and how, where to evacuate?
Shaka, I'm not sure I heard all that, but you want to know where to get information?
Yeah, I mean, is it through cell phones we get those notifications, but other than that, what is the one source, or how do we get the right information as to when and how?
You mean for the hotspots that we did, or just for the behavioral analysis?
Just as part of the behavior analysis.
So which one more time?
Sorry, my question was how do the public get the right information as to when and how to evacuate?
Oh, she's asking about just general information for public evacuations, so.
I got you. Yeah, in that situation, and Allison, you can supplement what I say, most of that comes from the emergency management organizations. And the conversations we've had with them is they definitely need to stay in control of the message and be the one sending out that message. But where the TPO might be able to help is to augment and reiterate those messages that come out, or provide some supplemental messages that come out. So, and having more signs, for example, might be a way for the TPO to take whatever messages the emergency management is putting out and get those to more in the community. You know, whether you put the signs on arterials or which would then also potentially have a function of, you know, being for traveler information daily, if you're for, on the interstates as well, for example, blockage, whatever. But having just, you know, having more signs and then getting information about, you know, 100, you know, Temple Terrace is 8 miles away, 120 minutes, you know, that might, you know, those kind of signage might make a difference.
Right, for the other information, Vishaka, so citizen information, you can opt in right now with the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County. And during storms, they will text people messages about where to get sandbags, you know, what to do. I mean, it's a matter of what messages they send out, but it's an opt-in process. So as far as what the TPO could be effective on, we were kind of looking at these kind of operational strategies of when you get on the road. So, you know, do you use the shoulders, phasing the evacuations going forward, or having variable message signs, you know, if you're on the road already directing you a certain way. So that's what we're wondering from the committee is, this is a technical committee, and do these make sense to you, or they're very obvious? I mean, some of them are obvious and some of them not. Like everyone feels like reversible lanes is the way to go, you know, contraflow, but sometimes doesn't work operationally. So why don't you just kind of, you know, do a little temperature reading from this group to see if this makes sense, or, you know, or something just sticks out as not intuitive to you.
Yeah, Allison, hey, this is Brian Gentry. Reversible lanes for sure is super intuitive and easy, right? I mean, it's set up for that already. So they have staff to do that. I'm not a big fan of emergency shoulder use. I've never been part of an implementation. It just seems cumbersome. You know, there's debris on the shoulders. Is the hard shoulder continuous to the next exit, et cetera? Traffic coordination, we coordinate signals now, and that's one of the strategies that Hillsborough County Traffic Management would use when evacuating, is probably implementing some diversion plans specifically for 75 on US 301 and US 41. You know, obviously trying to get messages to people with PCMSs and DMSs would be a good thing. And then phased evacuations, if you can. Hillsborough County has an initiative to install what we're calling POEBs, Power Outage Emergency Beacons. That's probably more important for me is keeping the signals at least illuminated, even if they're in flash, just so, you know, no one drives through with a conflicting vehicle. I'd like to ask though, you know, as we're starting to provide SPAT data and basic safety messages to different apps, would there be some sort of mechanism to get information out to the different apps that do all the connected vehicle applications?
So that's an interesting question. And thanks, Brian, for the comment on the shoulder use. Actually, that's a very popular mitigation technique that's being talked about in the state right now. So that's good to hear, you know, some other viewpoints on that. As far as whether it's good to get more information out, I think it's good to get more information out as long as you might be, your communication staff might be more expert on that and how much people can handle and still process. But what we would be looking at is, you know, right now, whatever communication strategies out there results in an evacuation timing that's not meeting the state standards for clearing our area, right? So would more effective communications, can it bring down, can it make it 10%, 20% more efficient if that happens or not? So as the TPO, we probably can't speak to the exact messaging, but we can tell that the whatever's being done currently, all the strategies we have, we're not meeting the state standards for evacuation, and that's why. And every time that comes up, you know, the kind of solution that comes to mind immediately is to provide more capacity on the roads, because, you know, we're not, that's the thought, that we don't have enough capacity for evacuations. But, you know, we think there might be some other ways to do that, because that's both costly and, you know, has some other negative effects to the transportation system.
Yeah, this is Margaret Kubelins. And so in regard to the emergency shoulder use, I used to be at the Department of Transportation, and the every year they, about this time of the year, they start preparing for hurricane season, and they review the plans for the emergency shoulder use, and they coordinate with the maintenance crews and make sure that the shoulders are secure. Like, they do repairs focused specifically for evacuation, and then clearing debris and all that. Their maintenance contracts cover that. So if they're still following through with what they used to do, then I have a high level of assurance that it is being addressed. So I can, at least that's what it was before. Let's see, the communication as far as getting it out to the public, you know, there's just so many different ways to reach people. Already through social media, as well as, you know, 511, Google's Waze, TomTom.
I think there was a confusion last round, and I remember what was happening. It was the confusion. I mean, which source to trust or how to get the right information out. That was what I meant by, you know, it's
okay.
Communication. So.
Right, and as our corridors get more enriched as far as with roadside units, knowing, you know, what is the real-time information. As we are able to monitor those corridors, we can update them quickly, and then assure people the information they're looking at is accurate.
And also, sometimes, even though you have the plans in place for the alternate routes or the route diversion, what happens when roads get flooded? Like, for example, if US 41 is alternate route for I-75, but in a particular section it gets flooded, then that becomes an issue, right? Then you have to, I don't know, probably direct signs could say that do not use that route now and use a third diversion route. Maybe that's another issue. I do recall, because we were driving back from Atlanta and we got stuck on US 41 distance because of flooding and traffic conditions. Everybody would try to take that same exit, and then they all get stuck at the same spot.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting, Johnny just gave the talk on smart cities, and you know, as the vehicles and this infrastructure gets more connected, the way we deliver information can be a lot faster, more real time, right? If you need to do a route diversion. I mean, I think the routing apps kind of do that already whenever there's an accident, but not every car has, you know, is on GPS, or not everyone's on their phone. They really shouldn't be on their phone when they're on the, you know, driving anyways. But so these strategies right now, I guess, speak to what we're able to do right now. So the ones you have in front of you on the screen are really on the road type strategies, I think. We have some more ideas, a few more slides on other areas, but these really are. And with the shoulder use, Brian, I know the state has, you know, a master plan, right? The state transportation, Department of Transportation, Florida Department of Transportation has a master plan, and part of that, I think, using shoulders for evacuation is on their plan. That would mean actually hardening the shoulders more than they are even right now, because anticipating more usage of it. But definitely contraflow is not an idea that seems feasible in the state right now.
Understood.
Yeah.
Just in Georgia?
Sorry,
Does Georgia have contraflow traffic?
I don't know.
Yeah, many states do, but it's more of a manpower and operational issue. That's not like it, you know, does double the capacity, right? If you could do that. Sorry, Karen, if you need to go on.
Sure. Well, I was just going to, this has been great. I appreciate all that feedback. I was just going to follow up with a couple other items. We are also looking at transit. I mentioned, for, you know, access to transportation is an issue for many. HART does a good job of, it changes its routes during an evacuation. It's reconsidering working with emergency management on whether those should be changed or should be kept the same. Also working with the school district to the extent the school district can assist in that in evacuations, which is historically done. But then also looking at trying to get people to regional, you know, to regional hubs to move further out, like Greyhound and Amtrak. And then we've already talked about this, the event-related communications, you know, the type requested by respondents, and then should the TPO supplement or support communication. So you all provided some feedback on that as well. And then some of the behaviors that are affecting this, and this gets to communications too, and trying them to affect those behaviors and you know, help new residents that are moving into the state or those that have not experienced it occurring in particular, when they should leave. So we have, you know, 15 to 25% of people in evacuation zones will not evacuate even in a Category 5 storm. That's putting quite a few people at risk, plus the personnel that will then need to communicate with them and potentially assist them. And then over 10% of people evacuate that are not in any evacuation storm, in any evacuation zone for any level of hurricane, at least starting with Category 1. So that, you know, there's quite a few people on the road from that as well. So trying to help educate people and work with people to see if their homes are you know, if their homes are safe enough to stay in place. That had been a big emphasis at one point in Florida, whether that makes sense to go to, or finding programs, weatherization programs or things like that to help people be able to stay. Like I said, we were just kind of looking for these.
Karen?
Yep.
This is Margaret again. Could you go back a slide? I want to make sure that I understand, like in the Category 3, that would be a mandatory evacuation for the A, B, and C?
For C, yes, Category C, mandatory, yes.
Okay. And then in Category 5, they're all evacuation, mandatory evacuation?
Yes, and the green is inland, so that's the area outside an evacuation zone. So at least we're getting good compliance, you know, over in category 5, but there's still that, you know, subset that's not leaving.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But most, actually, this data represents thousands of cell phone users' data. So it's pulled from the statewide evacuation survey. So it's pretty robust. And for the Tampa Bay area, we almost never get beyond the category 3. And yeah, just one other thing to note is these are only people with site-built homes. So theoretically, everybody in a mobile or not site-built home has to evacuate regardless of whatever zone they're in.
But we don't know where that's coming from, right?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Sorry, Allison, but do we know, when you said it's coming from cell phone users who are driving, do we know which category of homeowners they are?
So
We know whether they're site built or whether they are mobile or a recreational vehicle residents. So we just happen to show the data for the site built in this one. As Allison suggested, people in non-site built homes are requested to evacuate at category 1 at the very earliest stages on up. So, but we have the data on compliance and whether they do or not. We just didn't show it here.
Okay. I think we can move
All
on.
right, go ahead.
No, that was perfect. That's all we had.
this is back to the, yeah. Oh, one more, go to the questions.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move it back to the map if you want, but there's some corridors that are hotspots, and there's one that's overlaid with where the environmental justice areas are and where the persons with disabilities. And, you know, so you can get a look at where the hotspots are, and you can tell us if they make sense or not to you too. This is really from, you know, Hurricane Irma data, the congestion spots. So this is superimposed. The yellow lines are, there's spots along this corridor, you know, there's segments. That's why they're lines instead of actual spots that show where there's congestion during an evacuation. And you can see where they are with respect to the shelters and the little houses on the map. I think for most of us who lived here a while, those make sense to me, even though we actually looked at the data.
I'm sorry, excuse me. I have one question. I'm sorry if this was already answered. Was any of this like compared against structural analysis? Like did anyone look into, because most residential buildings aren't designed to go past, I think in the Tampa area, some buildings aren't even supposed to go past category 2, category 3, like let alone trailers. Just regular houses aren't designed to withstand that much wind. So were these hotspots taken, like was that taken into consideration?
These are congestion hotspots. So I hope we didn't confuse anything. So the yellow lines are the hotspots. It's just where there's traffic congestion during a hurricane evacuation. And the icons for the house is just where the shelters are.
Okay, so the evacuation is considering all the residents who live there, just in the area, because that congestion could just be, so that congestion was during like a hurricane evacuation for the area during a category 3, for example.
Yeah, it was Irma data.
Okay.
Irma data.
Right, so you're right. We don't know if it's someone passing from, you know, Pinellas through us. It's probably coming from the south, actually. If you see, you know, going up 75, it's not going across the bridge there.
Speaking to that, you didn't see any type of congestion around downtown Tampa with people evacuating from Pinellas County or through 275?
We didn't coming out of there, which was, and we saw some congestion. Don't get me wrong. We picked the top 10. So places, we had about 60 places that had congestion, you know, over normal. So there probably was on 275 coming out of Pinellas.
It might be, if you guys want to see the list again of where those kind of segments are, the slide before that. Yeah. So these are the top 10 divided between, you know, the interstate and the arterials. And of course, they're going to be northbound. Go ahead.
We were interested to see the George J. Bean Parkway appear on that, but that's an indication of how many people are trying to leave by air as well. So.
Yeah, provides 40 minutes to drive. Yeah.
Well, so actually, all this is posted on the study website. So if you think about anything more, you want to digest it a little bit and just write me back, and you know I can communicate that to Karen. You know, take your time. We're crunching some modeling data right now on different, you know, scenarios to improve the evacuation time. So we'll be back with a final report in the future. In the study website, and we're adding data to it as we go, but right now this presentation is sitting on there already.
Yeah, it's good insights, you know, for consideration, especially, I don't know, for our team and for our committee. It seems to me that it's just helpful to keep in mind how having the technology to monitor the roads can be very important. And I realize that I'm not very in tune to any like sensors that recognize flooding. You know, we have so much flooding within the city of Tampa. I'm going to go back and ask the stormwater group. It's like, do you keep sensors out there to know where the flooding is?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still kind of new to the city, so that's something that I'm just not even considering. But I would love to be able to have access to that data, incorporate it into and blend it together with other data that we have available to assess the conditions.
So the sensors, when you talk about, sorry, I don't have, excuse my lack of knowledge, but the sensors, are they for warning or are they for after fact, like tracking where the actual flooding is?
I would say the sensors for actual flooding.
Okay.
Right.
Like what you had, the example you brought up previously was, you know, like we could be active in an evacuation, but then as the sea level is rising, then, you know, all of a sudden this is not passable anymore. And so all the traffic needs to be diverted. Usually during evacuation, that's, you know, we aren't in an active flooding condition, I would expect. We're trying to get ahead of it. So people should be evacuating before we get to the surge.
That was our first experience evacuating. I mean, not necessarily we were in an inland zone, but still we were in our vacation and we were trying to get back home. So that was a totally different story. But still we got stuck in pockets.
Okay.
Where we expected that we should be driving through to avoid the traffic, and then that was flooded. So
that's a good point.
Margaret, I think we've been, you know, getting advice from John Apatosis from the city of Tampa on this study. So it's been really helpful to get some operational insights from him. But it's interesting how all these studies come together. So Karen and I have also done analysis on, you know, during Category 3 and 5 storm, we kind of know the roads that will flood in Hillsborough County already based on, you know, an average of at least like 11 feet of inundation, both from rain and from sea level rise and storm surge. So there's a lot of things layer on top of each other. And then Brian mentioned earlier about, you know, having kind of emergency power supplied to roadways during storms. That's really, I think, going to be important as this group goes through and considers the smart city plans and sensors, but also how to power all those sensors. Because during, when we presented this TAC, a really good question came up about, everybody's talking about converting to electric vehicles because that's going to greatly impact greenhouse gas analysis. But if we convert to, if we have a 40% conversion to EV, and then all those cars are, on the road and the power goes out and there's no place to charge it. So that's all, related things that I think touches upon what you do here in this group. But thank you for all your insights. I see a lot of ideas converging, so it's good to know.
Yeah, just to add on that,
Yeah.
Brendan, I think the stormwater data can be predictive based on historical analysis and forecasting. We just met with our stormwater group last week to try and integrate some of that flood sensor data. And it's minimal now, but there is a plan, I think, to add over 100 throughout the county. And I want to integrate that data into our Clear Guide, which is the software the NPO had previously that the county continues to utilize and have that data ingested into that platform.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, I think all this needs to be kind of thought of in conjunction, as you go forward with the plans. And it seems like it will fit nicely into kind of the smart cities work as well.
Right.
So, well, thank you very much. This has been really helpful. If you think of anything else, email me or email anyone at the TPO. If you email Johnny, I'm sure he'll forward to me. It's the email you remember. But the maps on the website, so you can click on it, or I can send you a bigger version if you need. If it's too tiny on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, this is good. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time presenting.
All right. Yeah, thank you for giving us your feedback. All right.
Okay, well, on the agenda, next we move to old business. Do we have any old business to discuss? She's got the agenda. Are you looking?
Yep. New business.
Now, any new business, any ideas or conversations that anyone interested in sharing? Actually, I can update you on the mobility as a service. City Council approved it, and we have a signed contract that went through the week between Christmas and New Year's, and we had our initial kickoff with Move It yesterday. So we are now engaged in doing mobility as a service, and we have a launch coming up. The initial launch is forecasted for May. So we are finally, finally taking action on that.
Is there any other updates from? Well, I can just add that we improved the state of the system report at the January meeting. I did present a status update at the last meeting, and we were able to wind up the work and get it up and running. So going forward, it's considered to be made like a ongoing. We have a website for it, so we will try to keep it updated with some of the crash statistics or whichever numbers are highlighted, and keep it updated as we go. That kind of feed into the TIP and to see where we are doing with the performance measures. So that's the hope of the state system report, to keep it as a living document and keep the data updated on the website on a periodic basis. Probably quarterly, or if not, some of the measures might be biannual.
Right, depending on when they're available.
Yeah.
Excellent. It's good to stay current.
Thank you. And I did mention before that we will go for the elections in the next month, in the next quarter. We'll be probably doing with the elections. And I'll reach out to you at that time. Do you have anything to add, Margaret?
I do not. Okay, so I guess that brings us to adjournment.
Sure.
Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.